Up next is our last panel entitled The Philippine Workforce 2030, Human Capital Challenges and Solutions. To introduce our guest speaker for this panel, may we call on the President of the Philippine Association of Multinational Companies Regional Headquarters, Inc., Ms. Evelyn Nang.
Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to greet all of the delegates at our Arangkada Philippines Forum on implementing the 10-point agenda and to introduce our final panel. Our last panel may be the most important panel because it will discuss major challenges over the next decade to making the Philippine workforce more competitive. What key skills will be most important by 2030? How best to prepare the workforce to be more competitive? What about the overseas Filipino workers? Will they lose their jobs and be forced to return? Point 8 of the socioeconomic agenda advocates promoting science and technology and enhancing innovation. Among policies needed to accomplish this are education and labor programs. Speaking to us on this subject is Dr. Rosemarie Edillon, Undersecretary for Policy and Planning at the National Economic Development Agency. Dr. Edillon was responsible for coordinating preparation of the Philippines Development Plan 2016 to 2022. She has also been overseeing the monitoring of the implementation of the plan. May I call NEDA Undersecretary Rosemarie Edillon to the stage, please, to make her talk, to be followed by the panel discussion with our moderator and 5 experts, followed by a brief open forum.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that introduction. Thank you also for inviting me. I see some friends here. Yeah. So the one who introduced me said that this is the most important panel. Such pressure. Anyway, so I hope you're still in your energies. Okay. So I'm here to discuss with you the current state of human capital in the Philippines and, of course, what we intend to do about it. Because as you know now at the NEDA, we actually live and breathe Philippine Development Plan. Okay, before I start, I would like to show you these pictures. Yeah, so the one on the left is actually a picture of the son of a friend of mine. So he was with a group of students, junior high school, from Rizal Science National High School, Rizal National Science High School. Yeah. Anyway, they joined the contest on the World Invention Creativity Contest, and they went home with 6 golds, 1 silver, and 1 special award. And so, yeah, one of, the cream of the crop. Over there is actually my son when I was still young. So we always used to say that the hope of this country, anyone's country for that matter, is really our youth. It's really our children. Now, from there, let me now show you. These are the indicators of the results matrix of the previous PDP relating to education. So we have set out for us several targets with respect to education outcomes. And as you can see here, so you have this first part here, which is the targets, and over there would be the accomplishment. Of course, we just have the accomplishment up to 2015. And if you go through this one, you will see that we actually missed most of the targets. except for the completion and cohort survival rates in the elementary level. And our hypothesis over at the NEDA is that it has to do with the 4Ps. You know, that program where children are actually required to attend school so that they avail of the transfer for their household. So actually there's a lot of opposition to the 4Ps, but seeing that it has really increased completion and cohort survival rates. At the time, it was still up to the elementary level. Then I would say that actually it's really a good program. I've just been to an immersion in a remote barangay, in a remote municipality down south, and I can tell you that the children there actually do not see much hope, even with education. And who can blame them? They don't have any role models. So their parents have not even finished elementary education. So for those who have reached some secondary level of education, they find that they're just there as well in their barangay doing jornal or hard farm worker, being employed only half the year. So the program of the CCT is actually, requiring them to finish school, because if they don't, then their families do not get the transfer at all. So, on to the next set of indicators. Where should I point this? There, okay. So as you can see here, these ones are for the higher and technical education indicators. So with respect to our indicators on number of graduates in higher education, in technical, vocational education training, and the certification rate, as you can see, we actually met the targets, more than met the targets. What we actually failed to meet concerns what we call the extent of staff training, to borrow the phrase from the Global Human Capital Report of the World Economic Forum. So as you can see there, the proportion of higher education institute faculty with MA degrees, actually we fell short of the target. Okay? So with the target on the PhDs and those HEIs with accredited programs, we also fell short of that a bit. So just this week, we had the release of the Global Human Capital Report 2017 of the World Economic Forum. And over here on the left is actually a snapshot of the performance of the Philippines. So this Global Human Capital Report actually evaluates the stock of human capital on 4 dimensions: the know-how, the capacity, development, deployment, and then development. So as you can see here, the Philippines actually scored highly in terms of capacity, but scored very poorly, the one on the top, and scored very poorly with respect to deployment. So, in details, and I have here, let's say, the ranking, 130 countries were ranked. So, Philippines, as you know, we fared very well with respect to capacity, but the capacity really has to do with just the basic stuff: functional literacy, numeracy, primary education attainment rate, secondary attainment rate, tertiary education attainment rate. We were mostly in the top quartile with respect to this indicator. With respect to the second indicator, which is on deployment, so the ones that, the parameters that they use here, the indicators were labor force participation rate, the employment gender gap, unemployment rate, underemployment rate. And here is where we really figured very poorly, especially with respect to employment gender gap. Okay? As you can see, among the ages 25 to 54 years old, okay, we ranked 101 out of 130 countries. Yeah, and that's really to do with the very low labor force participation rate of women. Now, you might think, this is human capital, why are we measuring employment? the thing is, the philosophy of the World Economic Forum, and actually the NEDA for that matter, is that human capital is a dynamic thing. So you have to use it or you lose it. So even though you are educated, if you are not using it or if you are not continuously educating yourself, learning new things, honing your skills, then you lose it. Underemployment rate is also pretty bad. We're actually in the third quartile in the underemployment rate among those 130 countries. And then with respect to, did it? Yeah, okay. So with respect to deployment, yeah, this should be development, sorry. With respect to development, we rank 60, so that's still in the upper half. But we were in the third quartile with respect to the quality of primary schools and the tertiary education enrollment rate among 15 to 24 years old. So we do have, the secondary education elementary enrollment rate is also not so bad, not so good. So although we rank very high in the primary enrollment rate because of our ECCD, the early childhood development, the quality is actually very wanting. Next. In terms of the know-how, sorry, I missed on the putting in the numbers there on the rank. We actually rank very poorly in terms of the medium-skilled employment share. So this one actually gives you kind of the encapsulated version of the picture I showed you, where we have this group of students that, were garnering all these honors in the international arena, and yet you have all these poor education outcomes. When we get to the employment profile, then this is what you see. You have, actually, we rank very well with respect to the high-skilled employment share. But with respect to the medium-skilled employment share, then we're actually ranked 125 over 130 countries. That's really very bad. So if you're talking construction business, the medium-skilled will be the foreman, the supervisors. So this is where, and actually this is really for the employers to say if they're having a hard time finding possible employees to fill those slots. And that is where we're lacking. And that is where we should really be inclusive. Many of you already know this. What is the dream? The dream is for every Filipino to enjoy this matatag, maginhawa, panatag na buhay, strongly bonded relationships, comfortable lifestyle, and a secure future. And we think that the key to all this is really in increasing incomes and in making goods and services affordable. So the income side and also on the price side. Of course, making sure that it's also quality. We have already actually identified these enterprises that we know or we think should actually be competitive so that they can offer goods and services at affordable prices. But the next part of the equation is really to increase the incomes of people. And to do that, we actually need to increase, or we actually need to get them to that medium-skilled jobs. Because this is really the part where they get paid well. And this is really the part where they can go, from one job to the other, not having to worry about all this endo thing. Yeah. And we think it's to do with having these 21st century skills. So it's not just about having the literacies, it's also about having these competencies and the character qualities. So it's not enough that they know how to read and write, which is our capacity. We rank very high in that. We need to teach them how to be critical thinkers, how to be problem solvers, creative, how to communicate well, and then collaborate. And then to imbibe these character qualities. Curiosity, initiative, persistence and grit, adaptability, leadership, social and cultural awareness. Then I have this very big timer here, so I'm rushing, sorry. So on to the PDP. So as you know, the PDP is the very first medium-term plan that is geared towards the ambition. And this is actually our complicated framework of the PDP, but just to show you that human capital development is actually over there in the second pillar, the one which says accelerate human capital development. And in the PDP, we have taken care to really distinguish between education as a means to an end and education as an end in itself. So we know that there are those who will not be working, okay? They will be at home taking care of our future generation, which is actually a big work, a big assignment in itself. And we know that they still need what we call this lifelong learning. So in the PDP, we have this part on improving employability. So as you can see there, there's the skills development, retooling through continuing education and training. And then, there. And then the part on lifelong learnings for all. So this is for all ages. So as you can see here, we took care to make sure that all life stages are there. So from childhood care, K to 12, including those in the dropout, so strength and inclusion programs, okay? And then continue curricular reforms, enhance teacher competencies, which is also part of those indicators in the human capital profile of the World Economic Forum. And then there, you can see in the middle, right down the bottom, is integrate 21st century competencies. We're still proceeding with these curriculum reforms in the K-12. As you know, now is the first year that we are having the senior high school. And what we intend to do is to keep on putting in new modules, improved modules that will integrate these 21st century skills. And so I have here the targets in the PDP, which I will not discuss with you for lack of time, and you can just read them yourself. So this one have to do with quantity and quality. It's really access to education, making sure that it's inclusive. And as you can see, as you will read through all these targets, these are all in the PDP. Okay, oops, there. So all this actually have to do with lifelong learning opportunities, making sure that always subscribing to the idea that human capital is actually a dynamic concept. You need to continually enrich it. Unlike physical capital that actually, wears with use, human capital is not like that. After all, the solutions of today will not solve the problems of tomorrow. And those are not my words. Those are the words of President Franklin Roosevelt, from which I also borrow this quotation. We cannot always build the future for our youth, but we can build our youth for the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Yusek Edillon. Kindly stay on stage to join the panel discussion. And now I'd like to call on stage the moderator for this panel, the Editor-in-Chief of Business World, Mr. Robbie Alampay. Joining him is our first panelist representing education, the Executive Director of the Philippine Business for Education, Ms. Love Basillote. Representing the BPM industry that employs over 1 million Filipinos, our second panelist is Executive Director for Talent Development of the IT and Business Process Association of the Philippines, Ms. Benny Bongato. Taking Labor's View is our third panelist, the Program Leader for Human Development of World Bank, Mr. Gabriel Demombynes. Also representing Labor is the OIC Undersecretary for Workers' Welfare and Protection Cluster of the Department of Labor and Employment, the Honorable Amuerfina R. Reyes. And our last panelist, representing education as well, is the Assistant Secretary for the Office of the Chief of Staff of the Department of Education, the Honorable Nepomuceno A. Malaluan.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for being here and for staying for the final panel. But hopefully we live up to how we were introduced as the most important panel. And truly, you know, it's been said very, very often that the competitive advantage of the Philippines really is the Filipinos. I remember Henry Schumacher at the Business World Forum when we asked him, I mean, what does Brand Philippines stand for? And he said, you know, I've always felt that Brand Philippines is built around Brand Filipino. And that's what we intend to talk about here. Also, by way of segue, because we know that there were a lot of people who wanted to ask more questions in the previous, from the previous panel. I think it's there's a logical segue here. Much of the discussion about disruption in technology earlier was really from the perspective of business per se and from the perspective of efficiency. Of course, we talk about efficiency, and the other side of it is the perspective of labor and work. And almost inevitably, the previous panel was already getting into this. And I think that leads us very, very logically here. Therefore, my first question is to Penny, actually, because this does straddle the topic earlier about disruption and technology and the impact particularly of people and sectors that where the rubber hits the road, as it were. You're there. We're generating a lot of employment in the business processing sector. What is the dread and what is the hope? We've discussed the hope for efficiencies. What are the dreads and what are the things that the sectors are doing now to mitigate as well as to exploit from the perspective of human capital?
Thank you very much for that question. You know, many of you know that we have Roadmap 2022, and part of our roadmap is already what Congressman Salcede presented, the chart on the different skills and what we feel will contract and what we need to do at the medium and high skill. And that's basically what we're doing, looking at the medium and high skill. And we have started our high impact program on upskilling and reskilling. So we do have this group, the technical working group, that looks at upskilling and reskilling because we know that disruption is coming. And if you've heard George Yang talk about artificial and AI pros, and he has been saying, don't wait for it to happen, let's embrace it, because it will come. So we in the BPO industry, some of the companies have already done it, Accenture, Infosys, they're looking at how it will impact their business. As an industry, we know that not everyone has the infrastructure of big companies like Accenture. So we have to do something to be able to work business, to be able to work across the different companies. So what we're doing now is we are working with entities like Ateneo CCE on upskilling and reskilling, Digital Transformation Institute. I know we will be talking to Dr. Erica of AIM because we need to make sure that our people have the knowledge and are ready. Now the question is, will they all be ready? That's what was mentioned about lifelong learning. There may be people who want lifelong learning. There might be people who they don't want to learn anymore. So the people who will want to learn are those people who will definitely stay.
Okay, it's good that you mentioned Erica. I was just sitting there, and she regretted that the question came up towards the second half of the discussion, and she wanted to, again, she told me, could you bring that up again? How do we make sure that all of this is inclusive, that as you mentioned, that this does not just apply to the big players? So if you could expound a little bit more, how do we make this more inclusive?
So what we're doing right now is create awareness. Our labor force, as mentioned, we have 1.14 million Filipinos in the IT BPM sector. We are expecting it to grow to 1.8 million by 2022. That's what Roadmap 2022 has said. However, the bulk of the hiring will be in the mid-skilled and high-skilled job. We need to upskill the low-skilled right now.
Very quickly, could we just define that actually for my benefit?
Yes, okay.
Low-skilled, middle-skilled, and so on.
In the industry, we still have data encoding, we have medical transcription. That will go away. I mean, that will be limited or compressed. It will contract. The basic, perhaps contact center will contract because of automation, because of AI, and so on. So we have to make them aware that it will. And we have to make them aware of what they need to do to be able to upskill themselves. That's basically what's the first step, the awareness campaign. And we're starting the awareness campaign next month across the different subsectors in the industry.
Okay. So this is touching on business processing, sort of, I mean, really very, very obvious when it comes to technology disruption and its obvious impact on labor and our human capital. Second, very important pillar to our economy right now, of course, on the other side of BPOs, the OFW sectors. Ami is here representing USEC Lagunzad for the Department of Labor. Beyond BPOs, what other sectors, particularly so OFWs, what sectors in particular are we mindful of? And we hope to protect, we hope to mitigate, but at the same time, hope to reskill. And how do you reskill? What is the vision driving towards which we reskill in any way?
Thank you for that question. Well, actually, the Department of Labor and Employment has been employing a two-pronged approach. No? One is, of course, promotion of decent and full employment. But another one is, of course, promoting and protecting the rights of our workers. With respect to our OFWs, it has been a challenge to us that about more than 30% of them are in the household service workers occupation, and meaning to say they are in a vulnerable situation because they are in residences and houses of their employers. But the policy has been very consistent that while we allow overseas employment, we have to ensure the full protection. And the DOLE and the rest of the government agencies, together with the DFA and other agencies catering to the services of OFWs, we have been embarking on consistently in bilateral agreement with destination countries to ensure that they will also respect the right of our workers, and they will also honor at least the minimum standards of employment as indicated in their employment contract. And we have been consistently also working with the recruitment industry and even the foreign employers in a sense that under our existing laws, it is not just the obligation of the recruitment agencies to send our workers abroad, but also to monitor closely their well-being and also their situation. And the government has, our country has a very good labor migration management system that is also being used as benchmark by other labor-sending countries. But it doesn't mean that we do not encounter any concern. Definitely those in the vulnerable group remains to be our top priority when it comes to securing protection for them.
Okay, the security and the protection, certainly everybody appreciates what the DOLE is doing and the DFA also for that matter. The Philippines does, for all the problems that are inevitable when you have millions of people going abroad, the Philippines does establish some gold standards in taking care of its people while abroad. But for the purposes of this discussion, let me bring it back lang to the question of not the protection, not the welfare, but the future of OFWs. What is the take and what is the perceived direction of the Department of Labor in terms of maybe what happens in this vastly disrupted and technologically accelerating world? What happens to our people? We've mentioned that, I don't know how politically correct this term still is, but we do have, as you said, 30% of our people in what they call the 3Ds, no? The dangerous, dirty, demeaning jobs. These will be among the first sectors that will be disrupted, very, very big. What do we do from a labor policy and from a labor encouragement? What is the direction?
Well, actually, we are challenged not just by technological advancement, but also other challenges, like, of course, the regional integration, the industrial reforms, and even climate change, and the crisis in destination countries. That's why, in the case of the Philippines, while we are continuously allowing the overseas employment, but we have to bear in mind that we have been strengthening even our reintegration program now. And that means we have to provide employment opportunities and other alternative opportunities for Filipinos who may be wishing to come back home here for good, or who need to be home for some reasons because of necessity. They have to be back here. And the dollar and other partner agencies, for that matter, have institutionalized the Azizwal program that contains a package of interventions for those who are coming back home, and that includes the livelihood programs, the reintegration, the scholarship. Now, of course, we also need to beef up the skills of our own workers for them to be more competitive. Okay. Because we have to anticipate also the emerging industries, of course, the impact of artificial intelligence. So we have to ready them for whatever needs of the present and the current industries here and abroad. But what I would like to emphasize that even if there are hurdles, when it comes to some policies in destination countries, the protectionist policies, and also the nationalization and other matters, but the demand for Filipinos continue to remain high.
Okay.
Not only because of our competencies, not only because of the skills of Filipinos, but of course the value and the sincerity of our Filipino workers.
Okay. Yes.
If I may add to that. Actually, just a couple of months back, we had this rushed and very intense workshop with the DFA, with the DOLE, all those migration-related agency. And the reason for that is because the United Nations is actually coming up with a global compact on migration. And when it was my turn to suggest, I said that for us, it's really about making sure that they still have those opportunities for lifelong learning wherever they are. Yeah. And the first thing that needs to happen is that whatever their educational attainment here in the country and the skills that they have obtained abroad should be recognized. Yeah. So that's one. And then two, that they should have access over there to educational opportunities, because sometimes they don't. But of course, with the advent of technology, we can also take advantage of online learning facilities. But I think we need to take care that the quality of this online learning is there. So we are getting there, but it cannot be a unilateral decision, because we're talking about migration. Yes. So, but I think the timeline is that by mid next year, we will come up with a global compact on migration.
Okay. I'd like to bring in our other panelists. We've heard from government, particularly our economic planners, Department of Labor. We've heard from the private sector. Let me bring in the education sector, particularly first Nepo and Love. K to 12. Let's talk about that. I mean, we've had about 1.5, 2 years already running of moving into K-12. One of the rationales for this is not just to bring us standardize along international norms, but also to talk about employability, particularly on the senior high school level. Early indicators of where people are choosing to go in, or students, young people, where are they going in terms of strands or tracks? Are they going into STEM? Are they going into VocTech? Are they going into the academic tracks? And what are the implications of this? Again, hopefully there are some numbers in terms of the actual demand of the private sector for the workforce right now in the foreseeable future.
Well, for the last 2 years, we had the grade 11 last year, and now is the first batch of grade 12, and we had the incoming transition. One point first is to note that there was a very high transition rate from fourth year to grade 11, and as well as grade 12. So there is a very strong support for senior high school. With respect to the tracks, as much as 60% are going into the academic track, and close to 40% has gone to Tech Voc track. And the two other tracks of sports and arts have taken less than 1% each.
Is there any insight there when the 60% that goes into academic track, 40% that goes into VocTech? Is there any insight there on what these young people have in mind? I mean, immediately after grad, are they going to college, or are they in fact already buying into this notion that, hey, I'm employable immediately after high school? And how do we manage their expectations given everything we've been discussing today?
Yeah, well, the idea is that both tracks should be able to choose between the different exits of higher education or employment and entrepreneurship or middle-level skills. However, if you take into consideration the idea that those that are going into the Tech Voc track might have expectations of really entering the labor market as soon as they graduate from senior high school, then that might be an indication, and there is where the matter of expectations come in. In other words, are these technical vocational tracks, are these the ones that are expected by the market? So we will have our first year of graduates this year, and that is really a matter for both to unfold and as a matter of future coordination that has to happen, managing the expectations and whether it is something that the market and the economy is prepared for.
Yeah.
The Department of Education now has the bigger responsibility than before, where our graduates are intended for higher education, but now there is expectation that was built on employability.
Yes, I love Philippine Business for Education. I know you've done your own research as well. You have numbers as well. Are we matching skill sets with demand on the private sector side?
Yeah, so let me just kind of introduce PBED first for those who don't know it. We are actually an NGO that was started by the country's top CEOs who are concerned about the declining quality of graduates entering the workforce. So throughout this panel, I will be speaking both from the demand side and the supply side, speaking as someone from the education sector, but also from the employment or employer sector. To your question about the demand and what Nepo was talking about expectations, PBED actually did a survey of the jobs available and employer expectation of what kind of competencies they actually needed for entry-level jobs. And what surprised us was that a third of entry-level jobs available currently in the market is actually, or are jobs that only require a high school diploma. So what we're saying is it's really high school competencies or senior high school competencies that could already respond to a third of entry-level jobs available. Now, where is the challenge? And to your question about where the mismatch is. In our experience in PBED, we actually see three mismatches when you talk about skills mismatch. One is general competencies, or what Rose was saying about 21st century skills. Second is technical competencies. So when you already have a profession, can you actually practice your profession? And third is more in terms of information as to what sort of educational investments you want to invest in. And that is to your point about tracking, right? What we are seeing is that our students actually don't have the general competencies, they don't have the technical competencies, and they are misinformed when it comes to the employment or exit opportunities that are out there post-graduation. And so what are we saying now? While jobs are available, competencies are not. So where is the challenge as educator? It's actually not getting kids to, well, getting kids to school is also a challenge, but as the numbers show, we're pretty good at that. The challenge is actually increasing or improving quality so that we meet those mismatches. Because what we don't want to happen is we are raising expectations that, oh, you have a senior high school diploma, you are employable, but are we actually communicating to employers that they have, in fact, the competencies?
Yes,
And
this
on
is
the-
something that Yusek pointed out earlier. I think
Correct.
we were actually lower relatively on the deployment question.
Right, and also, like, let me just continue with the challenge to the employers on the other side, is that what are the investments that need to happen, that employers need to do pre-hiring? Because I was talking to one employer a couple of months ago about their retraining budget for their civil engineers, and they're spending millions,
Okay.
right?
Gabriel Demombynes, I'm pronouncing that right, I think, is from the World Bank. So many questions. Fortunately, now Gabriel will give us all the answers. But Gabriel, you can give us some international perspective as well. Is there anything peculiar about the Philippines from what you've heard from this panel so far, both in terms of some best practices you've seen around the world in terms of raising the skill set, reskilling, as was mentioned by the previous panel, and also on the side also of what we might be missing out on?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I mean, in general, I've been very impressed by the dedication of teachers, and as well as the dedication of educational professionals in general in the Philippines. I mean, in many countries where we work, the problem is the teachers actually don't show up for school. So in many countries at similar levels of the Philippines development, the big problem is teachers just aren't there. But in our research, we don't find that's the case for the Philippines. Teachers, they are in school and they're working hard, and that matches very much with my impressions from visiting schools around the country. Okay. I always feel that the teachers that I meet are very dedicated and enthusiastic. Now, what really stands out in analysis we've done of the education system here is that despite that, and despite tremendous progress in enrollment and completion, we do find that school quality is greatly lacking. And we see that principally in the form of teacher competencies. So when we tested teachers on their knowledge of the subject matters which they're teaching, they unfortunately score quite poorly. So we really do see teacher competency as a critical area for further advance.
I'd like to share with you what IBPAP has done over the years, and we're very, very proud of what we have accomplished so far. A few years back, we introduced Service Management Program. It's a curriculum in college for IT and BA, which was approved by CHED under CMO in 2012. And the industry does the training for the teachers, with the teachers. So we conduct teacher training. We have master teachers training and teachers training, and we've done it over the past 5 years. So we see the quality of the teachers, we teach them the methodology. And the good thing about this, it's not even just in college. We've tried and tested it in Asia Pacific College for K-12. So we've had quite a number of batches, 2014 to last school year, of grade 12 graduates in Asia Pacific College who has gone to Accenture. So the curriculum has been customized to a company so that they'll be fit to enter right away. Okay. And out of a number of graduates that they have for grade 12, 80% of them got employed. Okay. Grade 12, yes. ALS at that.
Yes.
So it's very important that the curriculum that we have in college is customized to the industry. And that is something we've been working on for the last
I'll
few
get to
years.
Nepo again, but I'd like to follow up on, we were having a discussion, Gabriel, earlier on about some insights that you've found also. Jubert Alberto of IDC mentioned this earlier as well about the customer-centric approach that people really do love and value in the Philippine workforce. You said you've had insights as well on this, and something that might be crucial to understanding a particular strength in the Philippines.
Yeah, so this is closely related to something that Rose was talking about. We're completing a study looking at skills issues in the Philippines in general, and it has some very interesting results. We find that overall there's been an increase in the fraction of employers who say they can't find the skills that they need in the Filipino workforce. So that percentage has gone up 30% over the last 6 years. But when we drill down and we ask employers, what are the skills that you can't find? It's not actually technical skills which come out at the top of the list. So technical skills is on the list, but it's a bit farther down. What's at the top are work ethic, interpersonal skills, and communication skills. So basically what we call soft skills, socio-emotional skills. Rose used the term 21st century skills. There's 5 or 6 different terms covering this area. And we also find that when we look at how people, the experiences of people who have stronger soft skills, they earn more in the labor market, they're more likely to complete secondary school, they're more likely to be employed at all. And that's particularly the case for women, for younger workers, for the less educated, and for those working in the services sector.
So it does still remain a competitive advantage for Filipinos in particular, and as I said, until they develop an algorithm for empathy, this still somewhat insulates us on the technological disruption. Nepo, you wanted to say something.
Well, 2 points. The first point is that the budget of the education sector has really increased over the past recent years. For example, our budget level was at about 12% of the national budget, at just the basic education, to about 16+%. And overall, Representative Salceda has mentioned that just for basic education, about 3.5%. But overall, it's close to 5% already of GDP. What this meant for us is a higher level of budget beyond personal service, which used to be what eats up the big part, but a higher amount that is available for capital expenditure as well as for programs.
Yes.
And I think we need to now move the education sector, my second point, from one that is concentrated on access and traditional quality measures towards greater responsiveness to market and development. And I think that's where the area of soft skills come in, and competencies that are really needed by the market come in. Which brings me to my third point on really the need now to strengthen the coordination and information mechanism across government, the education sector, and industry. And
That's
I think this
precisely
is where
what
we
PBED
should be
wants to do. I mean, apart from this whole panel, of course, and everybody here, it's true. One objective to this panel really is to have that sense of urgency to this from the previous panel as well as this. Love, maybe you can expound a little bit more. I mean, what are some programs that people in this room immediately might say that, hey, that's interesting, that's something that we can certainly invest in, whether on our own or in coordination with PBED?
Okay, in terms of just industry academe coordination, we actually have this high-level policy group. We're calling it National Industry Academe Council, composed of the country's top CEOs, 10 CEOs, and 10 university presidents talking about workforce development issues. If you're interested in talking to us about graduate employability, connecting education to the economy, school to work, I'd be happy to bring you into the conversation. But
You could
more
also
concretely,
match, can you match specific needs of, company levels or even entrepreneur levels to, they're saying, could you in effect complement their HR?
No, yes, definitely. One of the things that we did in the past years was this whole notion of on-the-job training. People always complain about it, and actually in the senior high school, this is going to be a challenge because senior high schools are required to take, I think, 80 hours of on-the-job training, right? And we think this is really a problem of mixed expectations. And what we did for PBED is actually bring in industry and academe together in the same room and talk about what they expect from these interns.
I have one last question to Nepo, and then we'll open it up. We'll still have about 10 minutes for people to jump in with their questions. But yeah, sige, quickly lang, Ami. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just would like to point out two things, no, when it comes to employability, especially of the youth. Because right now is one hurdle that we have is really the high youth unemployment rate. But we have to really provide give value to strengthening of the linkage between and among the government, the industry, and also the education. In fact, for several years now, the DOLE has been conducting the jobs fit consultation with these sectors. But may I add also, because it was mentioned earlier about the competencies of the youth in general and the employability prospects, I think we have to forge an alliance here when it comes to providing the youth, no, an avenue for them to be more competitive. Because the department, for one, has been implementing the Job Start program. And I'm telling you that when we started the program, 75% of the more than 1,000 that went through the program was hired, no, within a very shorter period of job search assistance. But what's the value of this? One is it includes the life skills training. The values that one worker may be needing to succeed in the world of work. And I'm not just talking about the technical skills. And another one is focusing specifically on the technical skills of the individuals or the youth. And the third one, which is very important, is the immersion of individuals to the actual world of work. And I think that could be a very good partnership between government and the industry, and also identifying what are the emerging skills demand in the future, so our education could also be well prepared to ensure that not only children, not only the youth, but even the parents will be more open for non-traditional jobs and be ready to be skilled and retooled in terms of the emerging needs.
Thank you for mentioning non-traditional jobs, because this is something where I actually want to bring Nepo and Gabriel and Ma'am. Suraj mentioned, the sector of others and the subsector of others. In the Philippines, we have a technical term for that. It's called racket. And Nepo was actually sharing earlier an insight that this other sector does comprise a fairly substantial sector for our youth and for our young workers. Could you expound on that, and what might we be overlooking when it comes to these people? First of all, define them.
Well, it is a matter of necessity, because the transition from school to work can be rather long, especially if you are, and we will be able to test that for senior high school graduates. But it used to be not just for high school graduates of before, but even tertiary or higher education graduates. It takes quite some time to find wage jobs, and therefore you are compelled to go into self-employment
To bridge.
to bridge.
I mean, let's be clear. This is not necessarily somebody saying, I won't become an employee, I would rather set up a business. This is
No.
not necessarily entrepreneurship. This is something, it's a great temporary area, potentially temporary.
Yes, as a matter of necessity, and this is where the building the competency and capacity of your graduates, whether from senior high or from tertiary education, to be able to